MC Hammer had the world at his feet. At his peak in the early 90s, he was earning $30 million per year, had sold more than 50 million records worldwide, owned a 40,000 square foot mansion with 24-karat gold gates, and was one of the most recognizable entertainers on the planet. His hit song topped charts in 21 countries, his music videos were played every hour on MTV, and he had transformed hip-hop from an underground movement into mainstream pop culture. 8 years later, he filed for bankruptcy with debts of $13 million, lost his mansion, fired his entire 200-person staff, and became a cautionary tale about financial mismanagement that people still reference today. Today we're going to discover how MC Hammer went from being rap's first mega millionaire to broke and broken. Welcome to Celebrities Done. Stanley Kirk Burrell was born on March 30th, 1962 in Oakland, California. He grew up in a rough neighborhood, one of 8 children in a family that struggled financially. His father was a professional poker player, and his mother worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table. Young Stanley started hustling early, selling newspapers and doing odd jobs to help his family survive. But he had 2 gifts that would eventually change his life: an incredible work ethic and the ability to dance like nobody else. As a teenager, Stanley would hang around the Oakland Coliseum parking lot, dancing for spare change from baseball fans heading to see the Oakland Athletics play. He was so good that players started noticing him. Charles Finley, the owner of the Athletics, was so impressed that he hired Stanley as a bat boy and gave him access to the clubhouse. The players nicknamed him Hammer because they said he looked like Hank Aaron, and also because he was hammering out dance moves constantly. That nickname would stick with him for life. But baseball wasn't Stanley's destiny. Music was. In the early 80s, he started performing at local clubs in Oakland, developing a high-energy style that combined rapid-fire rapping with elaborate dance routines. He borrowed $4,000 from 2 former Athletics players, Mike Davis and Dwayne Murphy, and used it to start his own record label called Busted Productions. In 1987, he released his debut album, Feel My Power, independently, selling it out of the trunk of his car. The album moved 60,000 copies through pure hustle, and it caught the attention of Capitol Records. Capitol signed him in 1988 and re-released his album as Let's Get It Started. The album went platinum, selling over 1.5 million copies. But this was just the warm-up. In 1990, MC Hammer released Please Hammer Don't Hurt Him, and everything changed. The album's lead single became a global phenomenon. The song was everywhere. You couldn't turn on a radio without hearing it. You couldn't watch MTV without seeing the music video, which featured Hammer and his dancers doing the now iconic shuffle dance move in those shiny parachute pants. The numbers were absolutely staggering. Please Hammer Don't Hurt M became the best-selling hip-hop album of all time up to that point, eventually selling more than 18 million copies worldwide. It stayed at #1 on the Billboard charts for 21 consecutive weeks. The album produced multiple hit singles and made MC Hammer a household name not just in America, but globally. He won 3 Grammy Awards, 2 American Music Awards, and 8 Soul Train Music Awards. He was performing for sold-out arenas of 20,000 people every night. He appeared in Pepsi commercials alongside music legends. He was a guest star on television shows and had his own cartoon series. And the money was flowing in like a tsunami. Between 1990 and 1991, MC Hammer earned an estimated $33 million. To put that in perspective, adjusted for inflation, that's approximately $75 million in today's money. He was making more than most CEOs, more than most professional athletes, more than almost anyone in entertainment. At age 28, MC Hammer was one of the richest rappers in the world, and he was spending money like there was no tomorrow. First came the mansion. In 1991, Hammer purchased a 40,000 square foot estate in Fremont, California for $5 million. But buying it was just the beginning. He spent millions more customizing it into what can only be described as a palace. The property had 17 cars in the garage, including a Lamborghini, multiple Mercedes-Benzes, and a custom Humvee. It featured 2 swimming pools, a bowling alley, a baseball diamond, a recording studio, a 17-seat theater, and stables for his racehorses. The front gates were plated with 24-karat gold. He installed marble floors throughout and had custom-made furniture in every room. The monthly maintenance costs for the property alone were estimated at $30,000. But the mansion was just one piece of Hammer's spending puzzle. He had a staff of over 200 people on his payroll. 200. Think about that number for a moment. He had personal assistants, chefs, gardeners, security guards, drivers, accountants, lawyers, and an entire entourage that traveled with him everywhere. He employed a team of dancers who rehearsed daily and accompanied him on tour. He had family members on the payroll even if they weren't doing actual work. The monthly payroll costs were estimated at $500,000. That's $6 million per year, just in salaries. Hammer also launched a record label called Bust It Records and signed multiple artists, funding their recording sessions, music videos, and promotional campaigns. He started a clothing line called All Right Clothing Company, investing millions into manufacturing and marketing. He bought racehorses and invested in thoroughbred racing, a notoriously expensive hobby where you can lose millions before ever seeing a return. He was constantly giving money away to his church, his community, and anyone who asked. Friends and family members would come to him with business ideas or personal problems, and Hammer would write checks without thinking twice. Here's what nobody around Hammer seemed to understand. Or maybe they understood, but didn't care because they were benefiting. His income was not sustainable. Yes, he earned $33 million in 1990 and 1991. But that was his peak. Music careers don't maintain that level forever, especially in hip-hop where trends change rapidly and new artists emerge constantly. The smart move would have been to save and invest the majority of that money, live well but modestly, and build long-term wealth. Instead, Hammer spent like the money would never stop coming, and he structured his entire life around maintaining that $30 million per year income level. But here comes the devastating reality check. By 1992, Hammer's popularity was already starting to decline. Hip-hop was evolving, and Hammer's pop-friendly, dance-oriented style was being rejected by rap purists who saw him as too commercial and soft. Hardcore rappers like Ice Cube and Tupac were gaining prominence with grittier, more authentic street music. Hammer was being mocked in the hip-hop community for his parachute pants, his choreographed dancing, and his mainstream appeal. The culture was moving away from him, and fast. His follow-up album, Too Legit to Quit, released in October 1992, sold only 2 million copies compared to 18 million for his previous album. That's an 89% drop in sales. The singles didn't chart as high, the tours weren't selling out like before, MTV was playing fewer of his videos. Radio stations were shifting to gangsta rap and grunge rock. Hammer's moment was over, but his spending hadn't adjusted to match his declining income. This is where the financial disaster really accelerated. Hammer's expenses were still running at approximately $500,000 per month for staff, plus the mansion maintenance, plus the business investments, plus his personal spending. But his income had dropped from approximately $3 million per month at his peak to maybe $500,000 or less by 1993. The math didn't work anymore. He was spending everything he earned, and then some, burning through his savings to maintain the lifestyle. His record label was losing money. The artists he signed weren't generating hits or recouping their production costs. His clothing line wasn't profitable and was sitting on unsold inventory. His racehorses were costing money in training fees and race entry costs without winning enough purses to offset the expenses. Every business venture Hammer touched was draining money instead of making it. And he couldn't seem to stop or pivot because that would mean admitting the party was over. By 1994, the situation was critical. Hammer's album sales had collapsed even further. His tour revenues were down because he wasn't headlining major arenas anymore. The endorsement deals had dried up as companies moved on to newer, more relevant celebrities. He was still paying 200 people, still maintaining the massive mansion, still funding failing businesses, and the money simply wasn't there anymore. His accountants and financial advisors were reportedly begging him to cut costs, sell assets, and restructure his finances. But Hammer either didn't understand the severity of the situation or couldn't bring himself to downsize his empire. Here's where it gets truly painful. Hammer started borrowing money to maintain his lifestyle. He took out loans against his mansion and other assets. He borrowed from friends and business associates. He fell behind on payments to contractors and vendors. His staff started going weeks without paychecks. The IRS was sending notices about unpaid taxes. Creditors were calling daily demanding payment. The house of cards was collapsing, and Hammer was desperately trying to hold it together with hope and denial. In 1995, Hammer released an album where he tried to rebrand himself with a harder, more gangsta image. He dropped the MC from his name and started going by just Hammer. He changed his style, his sound, and his image to try to fit into the new hip-hop landscape. But it was too late and too transparent. Fans and critics saw through it. The album was a commercial failure. The transformation from pop rap sensation to hardcore rapper wasn't believable or authentic. The music industry had moved on, and no amount of rebranding was going to bring back his glory days. The final collapse came in April 1996. After years of living beyond his means and months of desperately trying to avoid the inevitable, MC Hammer filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The bankruptcy filing listed debts of $13 million and assets of less than $10 million. He owed money to hundreds of creditors, the IRS for back taxes, banks for unpaid loans, vendors for services, former employees for unpaid wages, and countless others who had trusted him to pay his bills. The bankruptcy documents revealed the full extent of Hammer's financial mismanagement. He had been spending approximately $30,000 per month just on the mansion's upkeep. He owed over $700,000 in back taxes. He had loans against his cars, his recording equipment, his furniture, everything. The court-appointed trustee looked at his finances and essentially said, "You spent everything you earned, and then borrowed millions more to maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford." There was no fraud, no stolen money, no external villain. MC Hammer had done this to himself through spectacular financial irresponsibility. The mansion had to be sold. The court forced the sale to pay creditors, and it sold for $5.3 million, barely covering the outstanding mortgages and liens against the property. Hammer had to vacate the palace he'd built and move into a modest rental. The fleet of luxury cars was repoed or sold. The gold-plated gates were melted down. The recording studio equipment was auctioned off. The racehorses were sold. Everything was liquidated to pay back even a fraction of what he owed. His staff of 200 people were all fired. These were people who had relied on Hammer for their livelihoods, some for years. Many of them were friends or family members who had built their entire lives around working for him, and overnight, they were all unemployed because Hammer had created an unsustainable employment situation that collapsed. Some of these people reportedly sued him for unpaid wages and benefits, adding to his legal and financial troubles. The public humiliation was devastating. MC Hammer went from being a symbol of success to being a punchline about financial failure. Comedians made jokes about him in their stand-up routines. Late-night talk show hosts referenced his bankruptcy in monologues. Other rappers who had feuded with him in the past used his financial collapse as evidence that he was never authentic or smart. The phrase "going broke like MC Hammer" became part of American vernacular. Business schools started using his case as a teaching example of how not to manage money. But here's what makes this story even more tragic. Hammer wasn't broke because he was scammed by advisors or because someone stole from him. He was broke because he chose to live like a king when he should have been building sustainable wealth. He chose to employ 200 people when he needed maybe 20. He chose to buy a 40,000 square foot mansion when he could have lived comfortably in a 5,000 square foot home. He chose to invest in multiple failing businesses instead of putting his money in stable investments. Every bad decision was his to make, and he made them all. In interviews after his bankruptcy, Hammer tried to explain his mindset. He said he wanted to create jobs and opportunities for his community. He wanted to give back to the people who had supported him. He wanted to live the dream and show other kids from Oakland that success was possible. And while these motivations sound noble, they don't excuse the reckless financial mismanagement. You can be generous and community-minded without spending yourself into bankruptcy. You can create opportunities without employing 200 people unnecessarily. You can live well without needing gold-plated gates and 17 cars. The aftermath was long and difficult. Hammer spent years trying to rebuild his finances and his reputation. He released albums that barely sold. He attempted comebacks that never gained traction. He appeared on reality TV shows and commercials, trying to stay relevant and earn income. In 2001, he appeared in a nationwide insurance commercial that directly referenced his bankruptcy, basically laughing at himself to make money. It was sad to watch someone who had been on top of the world reduced to being the punchline of his own joke. He also found religion and became heavily involved in Christian ministry. Hammer became an ordained minister and started a church, redirecting his energy towards spiritual rather than commercial success. In interviews from this period, he seemed more at peace with his past mistakes and focused on helping others avoid similar pitfalls. He talked openly about the dangers of materialism, the importance of financial literacy, and the emptiness of living for fame and fortune. The lessons had come at a devastating cost, but at least he had learned them. Financially, Hammer never recovered to anything close to his peak wealth. Various sources estimate his current net worth at somewhere between $2 and $3 million. That's not poor by normal standards, but it's a 96% decline from his estimated peak net worth of $75 million adjusted for inflation. He owns a modest home, drives regular cars, and lives a relatively quiet life. The palace, the entourage, the excess, all of it is gone forever. But here's the question that haunts MC Hammer's legacy. Was it worth it? Did those few years of living like royalty justify the decades of financial struggle that followed? Hammer has said in interviews that he doesn't regret his choices, that he lived his dream and helped a lot of people along the way. But his creditors, who never got fully paid back, might disagree. His staff members who lost their jobs overnight might disagree. His children, who had to watch their father go from mega rich to bankrupt, might disagree. The broader lesson from MC Hammer's story isn't just about money management, though that's certainly part of it. It's about ego, about believing your moment will last forever, about confusing wealth with income. Hammer made millions of dollars, but he never actually became wealthy because he spent everything he earned. Wealth is what you keep and invest, not what you spend. Income is temporary, especially in entertainment. The difference between a rich person and a wealthy person is that a rich person has a high income, but a wealthy person has assets that generate income even when they're not working. Hammer also fell into the trap of lifestyle inflation on steroids. As his income increased, his spending increased even faster. Every time he made more money, he found new ways to spend it instead of saving it. This is a common mistake that destroys lottery winners, athletes, and entertainers regularly. The key to building lasting wealth is to increase your income while keeping your expenses relatively stable, investing the difference. Hammer did the exact opposite. He increased his expenses faster than his income, ensuring that he would eventually go broke no matter how much he earned. The 200-person staff is perhaps the most egregious example of this. Nobody needs 200 employees. Not a solo music artist, not even a large corporation needs that ratio of staff to actual business activity. Hammer was essentially running a jobs program for his friends, family, and community, which is generous but financially suicidal. Each of those 200 people was costing him between $2,000 and $3,000 per month on average when you factor in salaries, benefits, and taxes. That's why his monthly payroll was $500,000. If he had employed a reasonable staff of maybe 20 people, he would have saved approximately $450,000 per month, or $5.4 million per year. Over 5 years, that's $27 million saved just from reasonable staffing. The mansion is another perfect example. A 40,000 square foot house is not a home, it's a liability. The property taxes alone were probably $200,000 per year. The utilities for a house that size, with pools and a recording studio and a theater, were likely $50,000 per year. Maintenance, repairs, landscaping, and staff to manage it all added hundreds of thousands more annually. If Hammer had bought a reasonable $5 million home of maybe 8,000 square feet, he could have lived very comfortably while saving millions in carrying costs over the years. His business investments were equally poorly conceived. Starting a record label sounds like a natural extension for a successful artist, but it requires expertise, capital, and most importantly, luck in finding and developing talent. Hammer apparently signed artists without proper market research or business plans, funded expensive production and marketing without ensuring the artists had commercial potential, and lost millions as a result. Same with his clothing line. Without experience in fashion, manufacturing, or retail, he was destined to fail. These weren't calculated business risks. They were vanity projects, funded by money he couldn't afford to lose. What's particularly frustrating about Hammer's story is that he had people around him warning him. His accountants reportedly told him he was spending too much. His business managers apparently tried to get him to cut costs. But Hammer, drunk on success and surrounded by yes-men who benefited from his spending, didn't listen. Or maybe he listened but couldn't bring himself to make the hard choices because it would mean admitting the dream was over. Either way, he ignored good advice and paid the ultimate price. The IRS debt is especially damaging because it's nearly impossible to discharge in bankruptcy. When you owe the federal government money for back taxes, they will pursue you relentlessly. They can garnish your wages, seize your assets, and make your financial life miserable until you pay every penny. Hammer's tax debt followed him for years after bankruptcy, taking a percentage of every dollar he earned. This is a common problem for entertainers who don't set aside money for taxes when they're earning. They spend their entire gross income, not realizing that 30 to 40% of it needs to go to taxes. Then when April comes around, they owe millions they don't have. There's also the psychological toll of going from the top to the bottom so quickly. Hammer went from selling out arenas and living in a palace to filing for bankruptcy in less than 6 years. That's a catastrophic fall that would devastate anyone's mental health. He had to deal with public humiliation, loss of status, financial stress, and the knowledge that he had done it to himself. Many celebrities who experienced similar falls turned to drugs, alcohol, or worse. Hammer managed to avoid those particular traps, which speaks to some inner strength, but the psychological damage was still significant. His relationships also suffered. Money problems destroy families, and Hammer's financial collapse put enormous strain on his marriage and relationships with friends and family. People who had been on his payroll suddenly weren't getting paid. Friends who had borrowed money from him watched him go bankrupt while still owing them. Family members who had built their lives around his wealth had to adjust to his poverty. These kinds of financial earthquakes create resentment, anger, and broken relationships that sometimes never heal. Today, at 61 years old, MC Hammer is a cautionary tale that gets referenced whenever an athlete, entertainer, or lottery winner goes broke. Financial advisors use his story to illustrate the dangers of overspending. Business schools teach his case as an example of poor financial management. And new generations of rappers learn about him not for his music, but for his bankruptcy. That's his legacy now. A warning about what not to do with money. But maybe there's a small redemption in that. If Hammer's catastrophic financial failure prevents even one young artist from making the same mistakes, if one athlete sees his story and decides to save instead of spend, if one person learns the difference between income and wealth because of what happened to MC Hammer, then maybe his suffering served a purpose. It's a terrible way to teach a lesson, but lessons learned from other people's mistakes are the cheapest kind. The music industry has changed dramatically since Hammer's peak, but the financial lessons remain the same. Artists today make money differently, through streaming and social media, and brand partnerships instead of just album sales and tours. But the fundamental truth hasn't changed. If you spend more than you earn, you will eventually go broke, no matter how much you make. Income minus expenses equals what you have left. If that number is negative, you're on a path to bankruptcy. It's simple math that Hammer either didn't understand or chose to ignore. What's MC Hammer doing now? He's still performing occasionally, mainly at nostalgia events and festivals where 90s acts are featured. He's active on social media, engaging with fans and promoting various projects. He's involved in tech investments and has tried to position himself as an innovator in the Silicon Valley space, though with limited success. He lives quietly in California, far from the spotlight that once burned so bright. He's survived, which is more than can be said for some celebrities who faced similar falls. But he's never recovered the wealth, fame, or cultural relevance he once possessed. The question everyone asks is, does Hammer regret it? His public statements suggest he's at peace with his past, that he sees it as a learning experience and a necessary journey. But it's hard to believe there aren't moments when he thinks about what could have been if he had just been smarter with money, if he had saved half of what he earned instead of spending it all, if he had employed 20 people instead of 200, if he had bought a reasonable house instead of a palace, if he had invested wisely instead of funding vanity projects. With those different choices, MC Hammer could be worth $100 million today instead of $2 million. He could still be living comfortably off investment income instead of doing occasional performances to pay bills. But here's the thing about hindsight. It's perfect, but useless. Hammer can't go back and make different choices. The money is gone, the mansion is gone, the empire is gone. All he has left is the lesson and the legacy. And that legacy is this. You can make $50 million and still end up broke if you're not smart about money. You can be talented, successful, and beloved, and still destroy yourself financially. You can have the world at your feet and lose everything in a few short years. MC Hammer proved all of this, and in doing so, became one of the most important cautionary tales in American pop culture. So what do you think? Was MC Hammer generous to a fault, trying to help his community and create opportunities for others? Or was he recklessly irresponsible, spending money he didn't have on things he didn't need? Could this have been prevented if he had better financial advisors? Or was this always going to happen given his personality and values? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories of celebrities who made millions and lost it all, hit that subscribe button and let us know who we should cover next. Should we dive into Mike Tyson's $300 million fortune that vanished? Nicolas Cage's real estate nightmare? Or maybe 50 Cent's bankruptcy despite his massive success? This has been Celebrities Done. Thanks for watching. And remember, it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep.